Good evening. I'm delighted to welcome you to the Jewish community Hustings for the upcoming London mayoral election. My name is Adrian Cohen and I'm co-chair of the London Jewish Forum. These hustings are being hosted by the London Jewish Forum, the Board of Deputies, the Jewish Leadership Council, and with our media partner, the Jewish News. This past year has been incredibly difficult for Londoners. The election will be about deciding who we want leading our city as we recover from the pandemic. To assist you with your decision at this evening's Jewish community hustings, I will be asking the candidates your questions on a number of issues. Whilst this is the Jewish community hustings, questions will cover areas of interest to the Jewish community and issues that will affect all Londoners. I'm delighted to introduce Shaun Bailey of the Conservative Party, Shaun Bailey of the Green Party, Sadiq Khan of the Labour Party, and Luisa Porritt of the Liberal Democrats. Thank you all. Thank you to the candidates for joining us this evening. Sadiq Khan did request that he break his Ramadan fast during the hustings, and he is of course absolutely welcome to do so. And we use the opportunity to wish the Muslim community in London Ramadan Kareem. Whilst there are, of course, more candidates to become the next mayor of London than the four we have here this evening, I'm sure you'll understand we've had to slim the event down to candidates polling above 5% to ensure a smooth running hustings. The structure of this evening's event will be as follows. All candidates will get the opportunity to deliver a 2-minute opening address. Following the opening statements, I will ask the candidates questions on a number of topics which have been submitted by members of the community. Candidates will have no longer than 2.5 minutes each to answer the questions, but candidates, please don't feel like you need to use all of the time. Candidates will have the right to reply to an accusation or comment made against them by another candidate should they wish to do so. We will then end with 1 minute closing statements from each candidate. To participate in this event, tweet using the hashtag Jewish Community Hustings. You can also scan the QR code on screen or visit slido.com and enter the event code, which is Q334. There you can submit questions to the candidates and upvote questions submitted by others. Please do ensure any questions submitted are applicable to all candidates, and we'll try and answer some of your questions. Before we get started, I wanted to use the opportunity to make those watching aware of our local Jewish community hustings that we have coming up. For the London Assembly elections tomorrow evening, we have the Jewish community hustings in Ealing and Hillingdon. On Monday the 26th, we have for Barnet and Camden. And on the 29th, we have the Jewish hustings in Brent and Harrow. We are also hosting hustings for the Hertfordshire County Council elections in Boreham Wood on the 28th and Bushey on the 29th. You can find Zoom details to join these events on the London Jewish Forum website. We are also delighted to launch our Jewish Manifesto for London 2021 in partnership with the Jewish Leadership Council and the Board of Deputies last week. And we would love all candidates to endorse our 10 commitments. Details of the manifesto can be found on our website. Without further ado, we will now move to opening statements. The order candidates will be called on was decided randomly. So first we will be calling Shaun Bailey, followed by Luisa Porritt, then Sadiq Khan, and then finally Shaun Bailey. Shaun, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm very, very proud to be standing for the third time this year. And I know that London could be the greenest city in the world. All the evidence shows Londoners are crying out for a new start and a real green recovery that raises everyone up, that creates a secure future, one we can pass on to the next generations with pride. As a London-wide Assembly member for the last 5 years, elected on the proportional ballot, I take very seriously the fact that I represent around 3 in every 5 Jewish people in the UK. And I really value the deep and important contribution that Jewish members of London make to our city as active citizens, as part of our community, and as part of our heritage and our history. And the groups organising the hustings today, I know, also share with me a passion to achieve the goal of a truly anti-racist city, because so many prejudices are on the rise. But I believe it is with true solidarity that we will stop this again, as we've done so many times in our city from Cable Street onwards. My Green Party colleague, Zach Polansky, is an example of leadership on this principle of solidarity, and I hope he'll join me on the Assembly after the election. As a member of the Jewish Greens, the Greens of Colour, and the LGBTIQA+ Greens, he's been leading on a programme of joint work between these groups to campaign on issues like defending Gypsy and Roma and Traveller people against new government proposals on trespass, on Black history education, campaigning on LGBTIQA+ rights, and on global action on climate as well. And I've been so impressed to see Jewish groups who are organising this hustings too, leading on all these intersectional issues recently, including the strong campaign against the Uyghur persecution. I hope one thing you'll see shining out from our manifesto, which is very long and detailed, is my commitment to listen and bring diverse voices into City Hall to make sure our policies work for everyone, and how this fits in with the 10 commitments from you today. I hope you're considering a Green vote, and I look forward to a good debate on these and many other issues today.
Thank you very much, Shaun. And now if I could turn to Luisa Porritt, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I want to start by thanking all the Jewish community organisations here for putting together this event, and by recognising the way that the Jewish community has demonstrated its charitable spirit and togetherness by helping Londoners all over the capital during the pandemic. Here in Camden, where I grew up and serve as a councillor, I've seen that work firsthand. From my local synagogue at South Hampstead to JW3 on Finchley Road, the Jewish community has stepped up to make sure no one gets left behind in difficult times. What matters now is that we have a plan for the recovery, and that's what I'm putting forward for London. My plan to take London forward has a clear focus on 3 basic needs of Londoners: jobs, homes, and clean air. The pandemic has accelerated big changes in our capital, such as the shift to home working and the rise of online shopping. I'm the only candidate in this race with a plan to embrace that change. From reinventing the high street to converting empty offices into homes, to investing in a clean, green, public transport system. We must get our capital ready for the future. I know I can't deliver this alone. It will require our city working together across the public, private, and voluntary sectors, including with faith communities. London is a diverse, liberal city, and it's clear Boris Johnson's Conservatives can't win here. We need a serious, alternative challenger to the mayor, one who will stand up for our shared values and has the big ideas we need to take London forward. Tonight, I hope to show you I'm that challenger.
Thank you very much, Luisa. And now over to Sadiq Khan.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join you this evening. I want to start by thanking the London Jewish Forum and everyone in the Jewish community across London, not just for your continued invaluable contribution, helping to make London the greatest city in the world, but for the way you've stepped up to support your fellow Londoners during this terrible pandemic, showing such compassion, kindness, and generosity of spirit. Over the last 5 years as mayor, I've stood shoulder to shoulder with Jewish Londoners as a friend, a supporter, and an ally. I've been proud to be able to stand with you during many times of celebration and reflection, from speaking every year at Hanukkah in the square and Yom HaShoah, to co-hosting events with the chief rabbi, breaking my fast with synagogues during Ramadan, spending Passover and Shabbat with Jewish families, and much, much more. I've also been determined to stand for you during times of adversity, and the growing threat of anti-Semitism. This has included ensuring the Met Police take a zero-tolerance approach to hate crimes and adopting the full IHRA definition of anti-Semitism at City Hall, investing record amounts to tackle intolerance and extremism, taking every opportunity to help ensure the horrors of the Holocaust are never forgotten, including attending Yom HaShoah as my very first engagement as mayor back in 2016, and to Auschwitz 75 years after its liberation, and speaking out against anti-Semitism wherever it rears its ugly head, including in the Labour Party. The Labour Party has turned a corner with a new leader taking action. And I want to assure you that I'll never stop working to stamp out anti-Semitism within Labour, across our city, and wherever it occurs. For as long as I'm mayor, I can assure you that I'll always be by your side.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sadiq. And now over to Shaun Bailey.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for having me. It's great to be here this evening with all the organisations that put this together from the Jewish community. London is the greatest city in the world, but it faces challenges. In the past 5 years, we've seen a steady rise in crime. We haven't had the housing provided that we needed. And of course, TfL has struggled through that long period. And these things affect not only the Jewish community, but all of London. And it's really important that we bring London together to understand how we combat these problems. Anybody who knows me will know that my politics is about people. How do we get people together? And my relationship with the Jewish community has been ever growing over 10 years, including my visit to Israel and, of course, my visit to Auschwitz as well. But it's really important when I was in Poland that I learned about anti-Semitism and its long, long history, but more importantly, what it means today, what does modern anti-Semitism mean today, and how we combat it. But for me, most importantly, bring communities together. I believe the Jewish community has an awful lot to teach many different communities across London, and I want to be part of forming that forum to make sure we have the conversations. But as Londoners, all of us, Jewish or not, we still have to face the big challenges and also benefit from the things that London can give to us. And I think the key things we need to get on top of now in London are: one, safety. We've had massive rises in crime across London. Two, we want to get on providing houses. Many traditions have slightly larger families, and family homes in London are almost impossible to come across now. We have to do something about that. But most importantly, we need to keep our children safe. We need to make sure our children have a future. And I want to be there to support mostly the Jewish community. I'm talking about students now who are finding a very, very hard time and to find a safe space on university campuses. And it's really important that we take every opportunity to fight anti-Semitism in whichever form it raises its head.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Shaun. We have our first question of the evening to put to candidates. Thank you all very much for your opening contributions. And I'll start off with this one. Anti-Semitism has sadly hit record levels in the UK over the last few years, with London facing the highest recorded incidence levels of anywhere in the country. As mayor, what would you do to tackle anti-Semitism in our city? And to kick this off, if I could go to Shaun. Thank you.
The rise in anti-Semitism we've seen across the UK, and particularly in London, has been absolutely disgusting. And I think it's very important that we all stand together and make sure we let everybody know from the very off this is unacceptable. Now, having that political that pronouncement straight away to start people knowing is just one part of it. The other piece, of course, is to make sure that the police have the resources to follow up cases of anti-Semitism, and that they have a training and a focus on doing that work. The work done by the CST, of course, is very important to Londoners, and I think there's something there that the police can learn from. There's a partnership there. I visited recently, and the volunteers on the CST told me that the relationship is strong, but I still think there's more learnings that can happen across the piece. I think we need to make sure we invest the money as well. Our online look at anti-Semitism and hate crime in general, I think, can be bolstered. It hasn't always been the most successful. I think we need to mount a campaign as well to have a look at the IP providers. I don't think the social media platforms do enough to remove offensive material. And I think the Mayor of London should be pursuing that as something that happens. And the other thing as well is to educate our children. For too many communities across London, the first time they come across anti-Semitism is when someone's trying to convince them to get involved. I think Holocaust education and it's linked to anti-Semitism and the history behind it. I remember being in Poland and being taken through 800 years of anti-Semitism, which even to someone like me was a surprise, just how deep it had run and how regularly it'd come back. And I think if we can speak to our young people and also speak to doubters as well and say, look, this is something real, unique and special, and we need to confront it in a unique way, I think it's important as well. And must always take the time, I think, on a more positive note, to expose other communities to the Jewish community. I believe the more people meet the Jewish community, the less anti-Semitism will prosper. All my time with Conservative Friends of Israel has just made me more and more happy, more and more welcomed in the Jewish community. There's a very warmness there. There's a lot of community engagement that I think would be stronger if it was done with other communities as well. And I think this is one of the real ways to beat anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is as much about a legal process as it is a battle for hearts and minds.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Shaun. If I can now go over to Sadiq. Thank you.
Well, look, anti-Semitism is probably the oldest form of hatred known to man. As somebody who is different, who's an ethnic minority and a religious minority, I understand what it's like to be picked on, to be hated because of your being. But you know, one of the things that I've done since I've been the mayor is to spend time with Jewish friends. The very first event I attended was Yom HaShoah, and actually you need to hear the stories from those who lived through the Shoah. This is a experience unique to the Jewish communities in response to how long it's been going on, the hatred of Jewish people. One of the reasons, Adrian, when I go on foreign visits, I spend time with Jewish communities is to make sure I'm their voice, whether in London or around the world. Two examples. In Poland, I went with the Jewish mayor to the Polin, the Museum of Polish Jews, because the Jewish community even today suffers real discrimination in Poland. In Berlin, I went to the memorial dedicated to the murdered Jews in Europe to make sure we remind ourselves how recent the Shoah was. We've got to make sure we have a zero tolerance towards all forms of anti-Semitism, and that's got to start from cradle and go all the way to grave. The good news is our commissioner, who is somebody who is determined to stamp out anti-Semitism whenever it occurs. And you'll be aware of the work the Met Police Service has been doing with the Community Security Trust, but also making sure that local bodies on the beat are aware about the high holidays so they can provide support. But as far as I'm concerned, it is a scandal that in the most progressive city in the world, the place of worship you go to, the school you go to study in, need security outside it, whether it's the synagogue or the Jewish faith schools, or in fact, when you go to care homes like those run by Jewish Care at the Nightingale House in Tooting. I promised when I came to the Hustings 5 years ago at JW3 to be a mayor who stood shoulder to shoulder with you. Hopefully you've seen over the last 5 years evidence of that. Should I be re-elected, I'll carry on being by your side, leading from the front, the scourge of anti-Semitism.
Thank you, Sadiq. And now, if I could go to Luisa, thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, we have to be vigilant. Sadly, anti-Semitism exists across our society. It's something I've become more personally aware of as I've started to embrace my own heritage more. But I have a proud record of standing up against anti-Semitism, as I would do for all communities in London. Here in Camden, we had a graffiti attack in my wards and across neighbouring wards in Camden as well. And we stood up as a council cross-party. I was a voice for my party in that, to say we have a zero tolerance attitude to that kind of message. We are an open, diverse, liberal city, and I will fight to keep it that way and to stamp out any hatred. I'm also proud that my party has led the way on standing up against anti-Semitic abuse online, when the rapper Wiley did anti-Semitic tweets. My whole party joined in standing up online and boycotting social media platforms until they took action, which is something that I personally advocated for. But I know that as mayor, the best thing that I can do is to work with the Jewish community organizations across the board. So obviously we've got some of them represented here today, but CST already does amazing work to try and keep the Jewish community safe in London, including their initiatives to protect buildings. So I would work closely with them and with the police as well to make sure that any reports of hate crime are taken seriously and that there's justice for any victims of anti-Semitism in any form at all levels. I guarantee that if you choose me to be your mayor, I will be a strong voice who always speaks with moral clarity, pushing for change and equality at all levels of government.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Louisa. And now over to Sian.
It's horrific that we're seeing an increase in anti-Semitism. I said before how many of the people in the UK who are Jewish live in London. We have over half the anti-Semitic incidents in the country, and that to me means that a mayor of London has to take leadership on stamping out anti-Semitism. And I think we have an amazing event in City Hall every year for Holocaust Memorial Day, and the way that those events work is survivors come and tell you about their experiences, and there's always people from different genocides, different atrocities come and tell you, and there's one thing they all have in common, and the warning everybody who's experienced any kind of atrocity like that wants to tell you is that the warning signs were there. They lived through the growth of prejudice, the othering of their fellow people, and that all came a bit long before the start of the genocides. And that is the thing we have to learn here. And I'm someone who supports the IHRA definition and the examples that it gives. I've supported them in Camden Council, in the London Assembly, and as a leader of my party as well. And I think it's really important that we do use the IHRA definition in practical ways to combat anti-Semitism and to deal with those warning signs, those examples of wider prejudice. We must put it into more of our education for staff, for police officers, for people on the transport system, so they can recognise it and deal with it. We must put it into our schools and our universities as well. It's incredibly important that we do that. I wanted to say a little bit more about the intersectional work that goes on within my party as well. I mentioned it in my introductory speech, but there's been some really fantastic solidarity between Greens of Colour, working on a definition and wider examples of Islamophobia. We've had the Jewish Greens working on the IHRA definition and writing some really, really good guidance that we're going to be using in our processes within the party. And then the LGBTIQA plus Greens have been working on definitions of transphobia and queerphobia. This kind of solidarity is what we have to have a mission for in London. We need to be looking out for the warning signs of all kinds of prejudice and really, really working hard to stamp it out. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sian. Thank you very much, candidates. We'll now go to our second question, which is on a very different subject, the housing crisis. The housing crisis in London is having a serious effect on young people in our community, and no doubt other communities as well. Young people are being priced out of areas which include Jewish infrastructure in London, with many now moving out to Hertfordshire to afford property. How can we ensure that young adults are able to buy affordably in London? And if I could go to Louisa to kick this one off. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, this is an issue that's close to my heart. I've lived in overpriced rented flats around London, and I don't think that should be the accepted way to spend your 20s. It doesn't have to be this way, but what we really need is a change of approach, because more of the same will not fix our housing crisis. So what I'm proposing to do is set up a London housing company. This would be a City Hall backed developer that's not for profit, that is just there to deliver the affordable homes that Londoners need. We've been let down. The current mayor has only started half of the affordable homes that he promised to deliver back in 2016. And that shows that we need to have a new approach. And that's what this developer would do. I would embrace change. Things like the fact that we've shifted to home working means that there'll be more empty office space than ever coming onto the market. And we need to make an assessment of that opportunity to convert some of that empty office space into quality, affordable homes. This is a once in a generational opportunity to finally fix our housing crisis. The other thing this City Hall developer would do is look at the public land that we have available. There's TfL land, there's land owned by the NHS around London. We need to be thinking much more creatively about the spaces that we do have and making sure that we're using them to deliver the affordable homes that Londoners need, and genuinely affordable homes at that. There's also more than 25,000 empty homes across the capital. And I want to bring those properties back into use as well, and work closely with local councils across the capital to make sure that in every neighbourhood of London, Londoners have the homes that they need, because this is a scandal that's gone on for too long, frankly, and we have a chance to fix it. So we should be seizing that once and for all. But the only way we can do that is by doing things differently. And I haven't heard anyone else talking about taking that approach.
Thank you. Thank you, Louisa. If I can now go to Sadiq as well. Thank you.
Well, this is an issue that's personal to me. I'm the council estate boy who's now mayor of this great city, and I wouldn't have had the chances to succeed but for the security of tenure and affordable rent that a council home provided. So when I began mayor, one of the first things I did was to get rid of the dodgy definition the previous mayor had of what an affordable home is. He thought an affordable home is one costing £500 million to buy, or 8% of market value to rent. So I threw that away. I've got a new definition, and an affordable home to me is one of three things: either a council home or a home where you pay a London living rent that's a third of average earnings rather than market value of rent. Or the third type of a genuinely affordable home is shared ownership, part buy, part rent, with a deposit of £5,000. You need all three of these types of home to help fix the housing crisis. And we've started to lay the foundations of fixing the housing crisis. So the homes that have been built now aren't luxury penthouse flats being used as gold bricks for foreign investors. I have nothing against foreigners, so my best friends and family are foreigners, but they shouldn't be using our homes as investments or as gold bricks. What we've seen is progress made. So last year, for example, we began building more council homes than in any year since 1983. The year before, we broke the record, the most council homes in any year since 1984. In the year before I became mayor, the numbers of homes that were begun where you paid a social rent was three. Last year, we began more than 7,000 homes where you pay a social rent more than the entire time Boris Johnson was mayor. 3 years ago, we began building 12,500 genuinely affordable homes, a record. The year later, 14,500 genuinely affordable homes, another record. And last year, remarkably, we broke it again, more than £17,200. 7,200 homes. And we've got plans every year to make progress. So by 2023, we'll have begun 116,000 genuinely affordable homes. And by 2025, another 82,000. At the same time, we've got plans to fix the rental market. We've already made progress in relation to a rogue landlords register, a licensing register, and also we've made plans through our lobbying for Section 21, so no fault eviction goes. We have a plan for rent controls should I be elected on May the 6th, so those renting can have security of tenure and pay affordable rents.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sadiq. And now over to Shaun.
Thank you very much. I think in my work in the last 5 years, I've really focused on listening and bringing diverse voices into City Hall to make sure that my policies aren't just for the well-off or even for the average person, but that they work for all Londoners. Because we've seen this year that the health crisis has shown that inequality thrives in these gaps. And when you leave things and you neglect things, you end up with people, on the edges, and people who are not typical average people really, really struggling. And one size does not fit all when it comes to all these practical policies like housing and transport, as well as specialist services. So I think my work has really shown how this can be fixed. I pushed the mayor in his original housing strategy to introduce a strategy for overcrowding. I've pushed him all the time to try and look a little bit more at the homes that already exist and how they are distributed, to not just focus on shouting out numbers of homes built, but to see what's really going on when people are being excluded from getting the homes that they need. So my policies do involve building a lot more homes. They do involve being more creative with the grants for new homes, but also I have a plan to pull more homes out of the private rented sector, get them let out at a London living rent using the unspent housing grant that Sadiq Khan still has in City Hall. And I also want to expand the capital letters scheme, which is where we lease homes on a long-term basis from private landlords and let them out through councils. There isn't a strategy from any other candidate to deal with the homes that already exist. And on renting rights, I mean, I'm a private renter. This is my privately rented flat. I've privately rented in London for 25 years. I've been a really fierce advocate for renters' rights this whole time. And I've genuinely pushed the current mayor to change his policy. It took 3 years for him to start talking about rent controls. You can look up the arguments we were having where he was saying we never get rent controls off the government. There's no point in fighting. There's no avoiding fighting for rent controls with the levels of rent that we have in London at the moment. And I'm really glad that he's now come around to this. But my argument at the moment is, Greens have been very influential on the current mayor. We were influential for 21 years on successive mayors. And I think it's really about time you elected a Green mayor who's going to get these things right first time and genuinely think about how our policies affect all Londoners, not just people who are better off or the average. We have to look in more detail at things than that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shaun. And now over to Shaun.
Thank you for the question. If there's any area that Londoners has been failed, it's absolutely housing. I grew up in London, and in my 20s, I was homeless. So I understand just how important housing is in London. And the Mayor of London has simply failed to deliver on his promises. He told us he would give us 80,000 homes a year. He hasn't built half that in 5 years. He talks about a record level of council house building, but he won't give us a number for these things. He's failed to deliver for Londoners. I think what needs to happen in London now is a fresh start. And my fresh start will be around forming Housing for London, a City Hall owned and backed housing developer that will have one goal, just to deliver housing for London. That will give me the ability, as well as to build homes for social rent, it'll give me the ability to produce 100,000 homes for £100,000 using a shared ownership scheme. You talked about young people in your community having to move out of London. This will give them the opportunity to own in London. Over 87% of people who rent want to own in London. Let's help that happen. It'll add to the supply in London, and it'll also add to people's ability to save and move on and accommodate their family as they feel. Another big failing, of course, of the current mayor's housing program is that he has removed the target for family homes. And we'll only ever get family homes built if the mayor subsidises the build of those homes. So that, again, is something that I will instigate through Housing for London. We have to have those targets set in order to deliver that way. But the crucial thing for housing in London is that we have to start now. The mayor has put a block at looking on brownfield sites in London. Strategic industrial sites is the technical term. I think we need to lift that block to make sure we have the actual space to build in London. There are thousands of hectares of land such as this in London. Of course, we can't build on all of it. Nobody's saying we can, but we absolutely have to be able to look at it. Because if we don't, we will price too many young people out of London, and some older people as well. So if London doesn't get on top of its housing crisis, we will affect our competitiveness in so many ways. And that brings me to rent controls. Rent controls have never worked anywhere. They benefit one generation and then lock the next following generations out of the housing system. They produce less housing and poor quality housing as well. That's why I don't think we need to instigate rent controls in London.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shaun. Right, if we can, Sadiq, right. The rules of the game are we did say we give a right of reply, so there were a few points made there in Sadiq's direction. So you don't have to use it, but if you would like, you can have a minute's right of reply to the points that have been made.
Well, the way we can engage in this hustings is by trying to score cheap party political points or have a grown-up discussion. And the reality is successive governments have let down London when it comes to not building the genuinely affordable homes we need. Anybody who spends a better time examining Shaun Bailey's manifesto will see it's made up of fantasy figures and somebody who's not a serious candidate. I think it's probably best, Adrian, I don't engage in the detail of some of his plans because it will amplify what are clearly bad policies. I'm quite clear. We've started laying the foundations to finally fix the housing crisis. We have record numbers of families now in council homes, homes who pay social rent, homes that are intermediate rent, shared ownership, part by part rent. But also, I've got our key workers to go to the front of the queue. What these key workers want is not a patronising clap on a Thursday. They want affordable homes to carry on living in London. If you re-elect me, I'll make sure that happens.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Sadiq. I think it's only fair if we give Shaun just a right to respond to that, and then I think, because obviously there's a danger this could go on, that would then move to the next question. So, Shaun, if you up to 1 minute, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Look, the facts are the facts. The Mayor promised us 80,000 homes a year. He hasn't built half that in 5 years. He has £500 million sat in a bank account that should be working to give Londoners homes. 87% of Londoners want to own. Why are we not helping them in that process? It's a simple thing. The Mayor of London has moved the housing provision in the wrong direction. He's relied on big developers who simply haven't given him what he wants, and he's doubling down on that poor policy. What we need is a fresh start. We need to move London in a new direction, and that means City Hall being in charge of housing, taking a more muscular approach, and that's the approach I'm suggesting.
Okay, thank you for all candidates. If I could move to the next question, again, it's a different subject. With the Jewish community being on average a third older than the wider community, our care homes are extremely important to our community. Fittingly, we now have a question from Jewish Care. How do you plan to support local authorities with social care funding as we emerge from the pandemic? And then if I could go to Sadiq first on that one, thank you.
Well, I've had the pleasure, Adrian, of visiting Jewish Care, some of their homes, and spending time, not quite in all 10 of their homes in London, but spending time. I also spent time on many occasions in Nightingale, which does a huge amount of work for older Jewish Londoners as well. I want to thank all those who work in care homes across London. I'm afraid during the first phase of this awful virus, we saw the consequences of neglect from the government when we saw the virus spread through care homes and a large number of Londoners losing their lives, the most vulnerable. Don't be surprised if Shaun Bailey blames me for the government not providing the personal protective equipment to these care homes and having these awful bereaved families suffering because of this virus. 18,000 families across London are currently mourning the loss of their loved one. In my view, a lot of it is because of a failure of the government to respond. And that leads with how older people are looked after. Social care has been the Cinderella service for too long. One of the recommendations we had a number of years ago was to have an NHS and social care. And I'm really pleased the government finally listened, but they've got to back that up with resources. There's been no resources given to our councils, who have already had more than half their budgets cut since 2010 to receive the support they need in these care homes. Many care home workers go from care home to care home, and that's one of the reasons why the virus spread, because of the government failing to provide the proper test equipment that they needed, the test and track and trace equipment needed. One of the things that is a piece of good news, and it's awful to talk about good news when it comes to an awful pandemic, is how London government is now working more closer together. So I'm really pleased to report that we have a London Recovery Board, and the co-chair with me is the chair of London Council's Georgia Gould. One of the things that the 32 councils and I are working on is making sure we get the additional resources we need to make sure our care homes have the equipment, the kit, and the staff to look after them. And that means making sure our staff are properly trained and properly paid. That is not just a London living rent. It's gone up to £10.85 since I became mayor, from £9.15. The numbers of employers paying the living wages improved by more than 200%. We need to make sure all our care home workers get the remuneration they need, but also they'll receive, with me as the mayor, an affordable home to live in London as well.
Thank you, Sadiq. And now over to Shaun.
Thank you for the question. For those of you who don't know, I used to be the chair of trustees for an elderly care centre, for a day centre. So I'm very well aware of just how important it is for a community to have culturally sensitive care for some of our more older, vulnerable members. I remember when I was the chair of the Pepper Pot, we were a real local hub, and many people, young and old, would come to us with worries about palliative care going into the future, and could we advocate for their parents as they approach that part of their life. So for me, there's two or three things that I think we need to double down on. Firstly, the working together around training and around local authorities. It will be fair to say that local authorities do this work. And I just think City Hall could be much more involved in helping a forum happen, so that best practice can be shared. Any problems, we can unblock the blockages, and of course we could do something about salary, because too many people in London do not get paid a London living wage. The mayor talked about the 200% increase in London living wage. Companies that pay, but it's still too small. I think it's a campaign that we could do cross-party to get many more people to pay that, particularly in care as well. But I'd like to go back to the idea that if we're going to support care workers, it is about providing them with homes they can actually afford. Too many London carers will be put out of pocket by an expansion in the ULEZ zone. Too many London carers simply can't afford to live in London. Their living costs are so high. So when I talk about 100,000 homes for £100,000, it is care workers, it is social workers, it is the people who make London work who'll be first in line to get these homes, because that secure basis of a place to live, that means they can pursue employment properly. And again, I know for a community just how important it is to have the right care. So therefore, it will be a priority of mine, because as you know, I was a youth worker for over 20 years. And the thing that struck me the most, if we treated young people the way that we often, if we treated older people, if we treated younger people the way we treat older people, people would step in earlier on. And I think our older communities do need more people to advocate for them. That will start in care homes. And I think we can all advocate for care workers by making many more employers in London be a London living wage employer.
Thank you. Thank you, Shaun. Shaun, can I now go to Sian? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think, the crisis in care that we see is a direct result of years and years of austerity, where councils were forced to freeze their council tax. And these freezes, they build up and they build up and they build up. Every time you freeze, you don't get that money the next year and the next year and the next year. So even percentage increases that the government have been allowing specifically to cover social care, they're coming on the back of a base that is vastly depleted because of the years of austerity. And I'm very proud to come from a party that stood against austerity, called it a mistake right from the start. This should never have happened. We should not be in this position, but we have to build from where we are. And I absolutely support, with our aging population and our diverse population, the need for specialist quality care and care homes, and homes for older Londoners that are at the earlier stage as well, before you need care homes, before you want to live in more sort of retirement villages. We need to be able to plan our city from the ground up. And my policy for having a People's Land Commission, that in every part of London, people can get together and look for what land there is, what land may be underused, what land could be changed in its use, and plan for the things your communities really, really need. I can absolutely see the value of this policy to the areas of London where we have high Jewish populations, so that you can genuinely find and plan for these things to be built in your areas. I'm very, very proud of that policy for that planning. So finally, just on the wages point that's been made, yes, care workers are grossly underpaid. They represent a really high proportion of these working families who live in poverty, who depend on housing benefits even to pay lower rents. I mean, it's an absolute scandal how much people can be paid. We've stood with care workers who are demonstrating and striking to get higher pay. And as part of my campaign, I've pledged to redefine the London living wage at a higher level. It doesn't currently take properly account of housing costs. It doesn't allow you a buffer to save for a rainy day, which it used to before it was devolved out of the GLA's economics unit. And there's no explanation for why that buffer has been taken away. So I believe the London living wage needs to be £14 an hour. And as a Green Mayor, I will set that level, work with the employers to pay it, and expand those employers to pay it more. We absolutely need to fix the crisis of working poverty in London, and that affects the care sector, many other sectors as well.
Thank you, Shaun. And now to Louisa. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the Liberal Democrats care about care. We've led the national campaign for a penny on the pound rise in income tax to fund the NHS and social care properly. Ed Davey, our party leader, has put carers at the heart of his national campaign. It's a top priority for us. The Liberal Democrats have been campaigning for a carers allowance, a rise in it, because we do need more than claps for our hardworking carers. And I'm proud that Sutton Liberal Democrats are the only council in London still funding Admiral nurses to provide at-home dementia care, so that people have the dignity and support that they need at home. Sutton is also one of only 3 councils in London still providing Meals on Wheels. And as Mayor, I will encourage all boroughs to follow that lead. We will always fight for more government support, which is badly needed, but we will also find a way to prioritise social care in the budgets that we manage. And actually, I think that we can learn from and share best practice from across our capital. There's the Nightingale Hammerson Care Home in Wandsworth. This is a leading specialist in residential care that's been serving the Jewish community for over 180 years. And that is world-class care that we can all learn from. So as Mayor, I will draw on all that existing expertise to make sure that every borough in London has the support that carers need and the care that people deserve, and make sure that nationally I'm a leading voice in ensuring that carers and people in need of care get the support that they deserve.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Louisa. Right, we're now moving to our next question, which is from Russell. And he says, with the United Kingdom and Israel doing so well with the vaccination rollout, how can we increase cooperation between London and cities in Israel? Will you commit to leading a trade mission to Israel during the next mayoral term? And we're kicking off with that one with Shaun. Thank you.
I think that's a really good question, actually, because there are, we've had a real blow to, we've had 2 real blows to our international trade in the last year. We've had the coronavirus crisis that's cut down on the international travel that we can all do. I know some of my friends are absolutely just can't wait to go visit Israel again, because they haven't been able to go, and it has been an absolute blow to our international links and some of the international ways that we can just create links and friendships and things like that. And then of course we've had Brexit. So we've really seen so many businesses, and I think particularly small businesses have struggled with this, with the fact that particularly we've left the customs union. Suddenly there are all these barriers at our borders, and so it's absolutely the next mayor's job to start making better links with all the different parts of the world, and going on trade missions, making sure that we're making those links is going to be a really, really important part of the next mayor's job. In the past, I've always worried that the London's economy was becoming too international, if that makes sense. I've always talked about the need to provide for more local support, but actually I think London and partners who provide our international links and our trade missions, as you know, we've famously been discussing some of those recently in connection with the previous mayor, I think that body is so important in terms of making sure that we do create new ways of creating both cultural links and trade links with the rest of the world, because I think our international position is damaged. It's been damaged by Brexit, and everybody's ability to relate to other countries has been damaged by the coronavirus crisis.
Thank you very much, Shaun. And now over to Shaun.
In a word, yes, I commit to a trade delegation to Israel in my first year. When I went to Israel, I was really impressed in just how far advanced they were in many different technologies. And I think that's very pertinent to London, because we have two things in London that I'd really like to develop. One is our fintech, anything tech, really. I think that we can make London the biggest tech hub in Europe and potentially the world. And I think a link with Israel would be a big part of doing that. And of course, in London, we have access to good finance and also very good financial models, and etc. So I think there's a real synergy there. I've already started to reach out and try to make that connection by speaking to the Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem. We initially were talking about tourism and how we could safeguard tourism in both Jerusalem and, of course, London, and how we could swap trade. What exciting innovations are happening in Israel that we could come over here, maybe finance in London or vice versa. And I think that idea that we could link London very, very strongly to Israel from a business point of view, a trade point of view, is at the top of my mind. I think the best way to go about it is I will be having a deputy mayor for international trade, because here in London, we have many small businesses that could scale if they had the right support, if they were exposed to international business. And of course, London is a very, very big it attracts very big inward investment, and we want to keep that going. So having a deputy mayor who could go out and continually bang the drum for London, backed up by the mayor, of course, me, but continually bang that drum will be important. And a link with Israel, I think, is a no-brainer, and I'd commit to doing that in my first year.
Thank you very much, Shaun. And now over to Louisa.
Thank you. Well, Israel has led the way on vaccines, and that is an incredible example that's been set. And you're right to point out that our NHS has also really done us proud by starting to match that really incredible progress that we've seen there. Israel does have a world-leading sector for tech innovation, and we absolutely should be sharing knowledge in those areas. We have an amazing tech sector here in London too, but sadly, Shaun Bailey's government is damaging that with its shoddy Brexit deal. So we have to, in that context, look at strengthening ties elsewhere, as well as improving that deal for our services sector. But there is so much more to Israel than just these two things. There's so much that we have in common as cities. Tel Aviv, like London, is one of the most liberal, inclusive cities in the world. It's one of the most LGBTQ plus friendly cities in the world, just like London is. It has the biggest pride parade in Asia, and that's something that we should be really celebrating and highlighting. And our countries and our cities should be working together to promote those shared values, as well as looking at the more practical ways that our businesses can work together, and our health services can learn from each other and share that knowledge and expertise, so that we can both really deliver for our communities. And that's something that I'm excited about, and certainly will be leading if I have the opportunity to become your mayor. I've been to Tel Aviv. It's an incredible city. And I think there's so much more that we can do together, including with other cities from around Israel as well, like Jerusalem. Thank you.
Thank you, Louisa. And now to Sadiq.
Well, the reason why a trip to Israel is important is not to make money, it's to build bridges and make friendships. And I'm the mayor that's led delegations to America. We know the president was over the last 4 years, to Canada, to India, to Pakistan. At the core of them is to bang the drum for our city in trade, investment, promotion, but integral is building friendships. We need to be building bridges, not walls. So yes, the last couple of years, for the reasons Shana said, have been very difficult for priorities with Brexit and then with lockdown. But should I be re-elected on May the 6th, I'll be proud as the Mayor of London of Islamic faith leading a delegation to that part of the world. I've got good friends with Ron, the Mayor of Tel Aviv. He's been a wise advisor in relation to the how to deal with vaccine hesitancy and the rollout of the vaccine. Great ideas they've given me about vaccine hesitancy: a gin for a jab, a shot for a shot, a pizza for a visor. But on a serious note, they've been doing some really good work to address the misinformation that there exists. These vaccines are kosher. There is no pork in these vaccines. And it's been really fascinating working closely with our friends in Tel Aviv, getting their ideas about how to deal with this awful pandemic. A really good example of Jews, Muslims, Christians, those who are members of an organized faith, and those aren't coming together to fight this deadly virus. But you know, London already is the European capital when it comes to tech. We're on the shoulders of Silicon Valley. One of the other things that the team in Tel Aviv are very proud of is the work they're doing around tech, whether it's fintech, whether it's biotech, whether it's legal tech, whether it's ed tech, whether it's mayor tech. So I'm keen to go and see what Ron has been bragging about for so many years happening in Tel Aviv, but also to bring business people and others from Tel Aviv to London. We want these bridges to not just be of friendship and of tech, but of culture, of tourism, and other things that benefit both societies. Another point that was said to me really powerfully when I was in Auschwitz for the 70th anniversary last year from friends in Israel, they couldn't believe that a mayor of Islamic faith spent so much time going to shuls, with Jewish friends, being the mayor that lights the menorah in Hanukkah in the square. And so I'm really excited, Adrian, about going to Tel Aviv once we get the election out of the way.
Thank you, Sadiq. Thank you, all candidates. The next question is about transport, and it's from the audience. And the question is, what are your plans to improve public transport links for those travelling around outer London? And the person who has submitted this question claims people drive these routes because the alternative is often travelling via Zone 1 on the tube. So question here about lateral travel across outer London. And if we can go to Shaun on that one to kick off. Thank you.
To London, I haven't seen the effect of this, and of course it means it leaves people in their car. And now the mayor is proposing to bring in an out of London border tax, which shows a very big misunderstanding of how we live and operate in outer London, because of course some of our relatives will live just outside and need to drive in. The tradespeople will use as well. We have a local park, and there's a guy that does a lot of work for young people on their bikes and stuff. He lives just beyond the border. That work will cease if he has to pay to come in and out in his little van. And the people who mostly can't afford compliant cars, of course, will be small business and poorer parts of our community. So we run the risk of really separating our communities there. So that's something that needs to be looked at. I think the first step we need is a real reshuffle of the bus routes in London. We need a mayor who understands that not everybody wants to go in and out to the centre of London. They need to go cross borough as well. I think that's really, really important, because that's what supports community life. It's the difference between your children being able to attend your local brownies or not. You know, how easy it is to make that transition across your borough. And of course, We've seen that TfL's finances have absolutely been destroyed over the last 4 years. The mayor failed to deliver Crossrail, which cost London's £5.2 billion. We've had 22 of 26 major infrastructure projects paused or cancelled. So what I'm proposing for a fresh start for London is that we have a London infrastructure bank. We can build the finances of that bank from mayoral seal and business rates retention, and it will give London, Chance Walk for London, £10.9 billion to spend on the infrastructure of TfL. Anything from replacing Hammersmith Bridge, which the mayor has let go. That's an awful shame. He should have just paid for that out of reserves, I said at the time. But the real thing is, if we give TfL that firm footing, we'll be able to support TfL to support London into the future. Because remember, TfL, the Mayor of London, has had the single biggest bailout of any institution in this country. It's about time we use TfL's finances properly to make sure the organisation is secure into the future. TfL was bankrupt long before COVID struck, and that's why my plan for a infrastructure bank will give TfL a fresh start.
Thank you. Thank you, Shaun. And now to Sadiq. Thank you.
Well, first, I think Shaun referred to me 11 times in his answer, so I'll have my right to reply afterwards, if that's okay, Adrian. I'll deal with the intelligent person who asked the question rather than Shaun Bailey. So look, the reality is that we have a public health crisis at the moment. It's a COVID crisis, and what I don't want to do is replace a COVID health crisis with a different health crisis, which is poor air quality or the other issues that would arise if everybody jumped into their car to get from A to B. The policies from City Hall, as long as I'm the mayor, are going to be to encourage Londoners to walk and cycle, use public transport where they can, to leave the roads for those that can't use those things, the electrician, the plumber, the person who needs to drive, the commercial drivers, and so forth. One of the things that I was faced with over the last 13 months during this pandemic is the government forcing me to extend the congestion charge to go all the way to the North Circular and all the way to the South Circular, which would have meant that 4 million additional Londoners would have been covered by that. I said no. What the government did, though, insist on is for me to widen the scope, so it's not Monday to Friday, it's now 7 days a week, to increase it from £11.50 to £15, but also to extend it to 10 p.m. Had I not accepted those conditions, I wouldn't have received the support TfL needs. And the only reason TfL needs financial support is because of the pandemic. Londoners have done the right thing and not travelled, and that's meant our fares income has dried up. It's the same for every single transport authority around the globe. London is not unique. What we're doing, though, is in TfL becoming more efficient. So I'm the mayor. That's reduced our deficit, increased cash surpluses. But what I want to do is build on the progress we've made. So the Hopper bus fare used by 500 million people, we need to improve on that and have more bus services in outer London in particular, where there isn't as good tube services. We want to leave the main roads for people who need to use their vehicles. Main roads are what they say on the tin, to be used as a main artery. What we don't want is drivers using our side roads as rat runs. And that's why I don't apologise for encouraging walking and cycling. And it's really important that we realise that the way to invest in London going forward is for us to be green. Walking, cycling, public transport, leave vehicles for those that have to use them.
Thank you, Sadiq. I've got Louisa and then Shaun. What I propose to do in terms of right of reply is Sadiq to come back at the end of the question, and then after Shaun, and then I think I should also give Shaun a right of reply as well. So if we can give you both a minute to do that. If I can go to Louisa, thank you.
Sure, thank you. Well, what we need is a plan to fund our public transport system properly if we want to clean up our air and put our transport network back on a sustainable footing and bring some of the projects that are currently on ice back into TfL's plans. So that's what I'm putting forward. I would fund our public transport network in the longer run with the introduction of a fairer pay-as-you-go road pricing scheme, stopping all these flat rate schemes that disproportionately impact certain communities based on where they live and can split communities apart. And it's not fair, actually, to have a flat rate scheme, because it means that you could have a delivery driver for a supermarket riding all over our city in a day and paying the same as a resident who needs to go and visit a member of their family in a certain zone. So my system would be much smarter and fairer than that, and charge based on things like the length of journey and the distance covered. So that's something that would also raise money for TfL and get some of these public transport projects that we desperately need off ice. Things like the tram link to Sutton, the extension of the Bakerloo line, and Crossrail 2, which is currently on hold. All of these projects need to be priorities over the Mayor's £2 billion polluting Silvertown Tunnel that he is building in East and South East London, and would only make our air quality, which is already so bad in London. We know the health impacts for people. Children are dying from it. I'm an asthmatic because of it. We need to be serious about tackling the climate emergency. So we should be investing in public transport. And I would also recognise change by bringing down costs for remote workers. So I've said that I will introduce a flexible travel card. This would make it more affordable for flexible commuters, as flexible workers commuting into the city, so that they're saving over £500 a year. And I would also extend the Santander cycle hire scheme, so it's free every Sunday, making it easier for Londoners to become cyclists and take up a healthy habit, and getting people back into central London again in a climate-friendly way.
Thank you, Louisa. And now to Shaun.
Thank you so much, and thank you for asking it in relation to Outer London as well. I know that far too many people in Outer London genuinely feel trapped with their cars. We did some research in the Assembly and we found about a fifth of Londoners saying they felt forced to own a car, and that's not right. People need choices and they need a quality public transport system available to them so they have that choice. And I think improving transport in Outer London, it's one of the clearest examples of the principle that when you become mayor, you get a system to manage, not a magic wand. And transport is the absolute epitome of that. And I bring a truly transformative and integrated transport policy to London. For Outer London, one of the things I want to do is lower the fares for Outer Londoners. I think the zone system is completely out of date. People don't have a choice about where they live and where they work. And it's unfair that people who live in zones 4, 5 and 6 pay so much more than people in zones 1 and 2. The zone system hasn't changed since the 1990s. I've been pushing a change to a single zone for 5 years. There's been no action. I would get on with that and bring down fares. That would be the first real benefit people would see. We need better buses. We need better buses running around Outer London so people can get from place to place without going into the centre. But that depends, running them efficiently depends on getting some traffic off the main road. So we need to have a traffic reduction target overall, which the current mayor does not have. London doesn't have one. This needs to be backed up with investment in other ways to get around. I'll triple the cycling budget. And then, like Louisa, I support the introduction of smart, fair road charging for London with the Liberal Democrats in the Assembly. We've pushed for that again and again from the current mayor, and he hasn't even done a shred of work on developing it. And it's so disappointing because this is the thing, whereas that makes all these other things possible. It creates space on the roads. And then finally, on air pollution, genuinely, current mayor, I cannot understand why you chose this middle option of only taking the ultra low emission zone to the north and south circular, leaving out almost all of Outer London. You promised to be a mayor for all Londoners. All Londoners need protection from pollution and the benefits that an ultra low emission zone will bring. So please explain why you didn't protect all Londoners in the way you could have.
Thank you, Shaun. Right, what I'm going to do now is I'll go to Shaun first to have his right of reply, and then, as Sadiq's been mentioned by more than one candidate, then Sadiq has his right of reply following Shaun. Shaun, over to you.
So I thought you were going to go to the mayor first, Chair, or do you want me to go first?
I think you, because he has to respond also to Shaun as well.
Okay, fair enough. Look, let's be clear about what happened with the extension of the congestion zone. The mayor refused to take responsibility, so the government sent him some suggestions, and then he told everyone they made him do something. But that's important because it shows the relationship between the mayor of London and the civil service. The government has broken down, which will make it almost impossible for him to get a good deal for Londoners. There's a massive difference between fighting with the government and fighting for Londoners. That is very, very important. Look, TfL's finances have been suffering for years. The mayor's talked about reducing the deficit, but the debt has not reduced. We still have a record amount of debt, and that's grown under Sadiq Khan's watch. And let's be clear, when Sadiq Khan received Crossrail, it was on budget and on time, and now it's how many years late, we don't know, and £5.2 billion over budget. That's important. But if you look at the extension of the ULEZ, that's going to cut communities in half. If you go to Kinloss, that's going to be a big...
And secondly, it's like he's just landed from Mars in London today and not realised we've had a pandemic for the last 13 months. Every transport authority in the world is having financial challenges because people aren't paying fares. We as a city are more reliant on fares income than any city in the world. 72% of our income comes from fares versus 38% in Paris and 28% in Singapore. That's why TfL has financial challenges. Ken Livingstone had a debt of £2 billion. Boris Johnson, £7 billion. I've borrowed £2 billion. I'm paying off Boris Johnson's debt with interest. The deficit when I became mayor, £1.5 billion. I reduced the deficit by 71%, whilst increasing cash balances by 13% to £2.2 billion. And here's the other thing. When Boris Johnson was mayor, Shaun Bailey's mentor, fares went up by more than 42%. I've frozen fares over the last 5 years, so the average London household has benefited by £200. At the same time, I've introduced a hopper bus fare, so you can change buses as many times as you want within an hour and not pay a penny more, used by more than 500 million journeys. So look, the choice is simple on May the 6th. Somebody who supports raising fares, extending the congestion charge, doing London down, or a mayor speaking up for London, standing up for our city, getting the best deal for our city.
Thank you, Sadiq. Okay. I'm conscious of trying to get in as many questions as we can, and I do appreciate there's a tension between that and candidates also having the opportunity to talk adversely about each other. But I need to. I hope everyone appreciates.
But Chair, yeah, it's quite hard for the three of us to have this conversation without naming the mayor. He has been the mayor.
Oh, no, I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm not. That's all right. I'm not.
But every time you name him, every time you name him, you give him the right to reply, and I agree. But then he names us, and we don't have the right to reply. I just ask you to wrestle with that. Thank you, Chair.
No, sure. Sure. I mean, I did give you a right to reply, but no, I'm trying to be as even-handed as I can.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shaun. Thank you.
Adrian, I'm glad he's blaming you for that, because normally he blames me for everything else.
Shaun, would you like a right to reply to that?
I blame Sadiq Khan for everything else because he is responsible for all of these things. We've seen everything fall apart in London, and he continually manipulates the facts. TfL has struggled. Everybody knows that, and it was bankrupt before Corona hit. And remember, the fares rise was in TfL's 2019 budget, long before Corona hit. So the mayor suggesting that the only problem TfL has had is Corona simply isn't true. Of course, Corona and lockdown has been a massive problem to TfL. We all accept that, but so has Sadiq Khan been a big problem for TfL.
Thank you, Shaun. I'm also conscious that I don't want Louisa and Sian to feel left out as well. So I got to, as you'll see, I am really trying to be even-handed here.
You are, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
The more we hear from Shaun, the better for my election chances. So please, more Shaun.
Okay. All right. Thank you all. Right. So as we don't run out of time, the next question is from James Harris, who is president of the the Union of Jewish Students. Sorry, that's me getting confused. Maybe he'll become the president of the United Synagogue in due course. He has asked, will the candidates commit to ensuring that every university in London adopts the Ihra definition of anti-Semitism? and that campus is a safe space for Jewish students. And if I could go to Louisa as well, thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, all of our public forums should be adopting the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. I'm proud to sit on a council in Camden where we have adopted that definition, and all public bodies should be doing it and making it clear that they are a safe space for Jews. So I'd absolutely work with our universities to make sure that they do that. And that they do it for other communities as well, because we know that an attack on any minorities or failure to embrace them is an attack on all of us, frankly. So yeah, you have that commitment from me. I'm not sure I have much more to add to it. I mean, this is something that we need to see done across the country, actually, and across our society. It's one of the many clear steps that we need to take as a society to make sure that we are doing the concrete work to root out anti-Semitism and prejudice and intolerance. That's a clear way of showing it and making sure that young Jewish Londoners feel embraced and feel welcome. We are a diverse, all-inclusive city, and we need to be showing that in all of our bodies across the capital.
Thank you very much for that, Louisa. And now to Shaun.
Yeah, I also talked quite extensively about this in my previous answer, but I think you know, I do agree. I think it's really important that just adopting it as a symbolic gesture isn't the point, though. The point is to use the examples and the definitions to actually, you know, use those to determine between things. We've within Camden, we adopted the guidance and the definition within our guidance for holding public meetings, which also was already existed and had comments about, you know, the limits of free speech. And we've had problems in Camden in the past with the far right trying to hire public buildings to hold events. So we already have this guidance, and we've put it within that, and it's proved really successful as a way of just making sure we know when to draw the line and when not to, when something is simply about free speech. And I think it's just a really useful thing that I think everybody ought to get more educated about. Certainly within the Green Party, we've had some excellent training and really sort of in-depth seminars where we've looked at some of the examples, and it's been incredibly illuminating and educational to me, and very, very useful. And this all stems from this process of adopting and then using and then discussing the examples that lie within it. So I'm a supporter of this, and I think it's important that we do recognize that anti-Semitism and racism in general is insidious and can really metamorphosize to get around things and be very subtle, and it's very, very important that we are as educated as possible and that we listen to the groups affected and make sure that we're aware and alive to this problem, because I genuinely believe it's growing. I believe prejudices in general are growing and spreading in new ways, and that is something that our society and the whole world needs to fight a battle on in the next few years.
Thank you, Shaun. And now, if we can go to Sadiq, thank you.
Can I just say how much I agree with Shaun's really thoughtful and considered answer? I think she's spot on. Simply tick boxing a definition is not enough. You need meaningful organisational change. And so, yes, of course, I support the Ihra definition being adopted in the HE sector, but we've got to make sure that all our organisations are anti-racist organisations. So in City Hall, I adopted the Ihra definition, but I've made City Hall not racist, but anti-racist, so it permeates through what we do. And you'll remember, Adrian, the Labour Party at the time failed to adopt the Ihra definition. And I stood up to the party I belong to and said, you're wrong. The Ihra definition with examples is important. An example of me standing up for our city, even though it's uncomfortable, against my party. And that's sort of where I've been, working closely where I need to with my party and the government, but standing up for our city where it needs to happen. And can I say this? The way the Jewish community came to my defense during the most divisive campaign London's seen in 2016, the way the Jewish community came to my defense when I was attacked by Trump and the extreme right. The way the Jewish community came to my defense when the Tory candidate for mayor retweeted an Islamophobic tweet that called me, and I quote, the mad mullah of Lundistan. I want to thank you. And that's what Cable Street teaches us, solidarity. I am the keeper of my brother and sister. I'm not going to walk on the other side of the road. So look, you've seen me walk the walk over the last 5 years. I convene regularly vice chancellors and others from the HE sector. I'll make sure the next time after May the 6th, should I have the privilege and honor of being re-elected, I raised the issue of, yes, of course, Sean's right. We need free speech. Free speech is important. Article 8, Article 10 are important parts of the Human Rights Act, not yet abolished by this government, I hasten to add. But part of that is making sure that doesn't lead to demonization, inciting hatred, and people feeling uncomfortable because of who they are. And I've seen too many examples over the last 5 years of Jewish people, of Black people, of women, of Muslims, and many others, disabled, being treated differently, less favorably because of things outside of their control. So I promise you, Adrian, should I be re-elected, I'll work with the Jewish community to have the Ihra definition extended, but making sure there's organizational change as well as a tick box exercise.
Thank you. Thank you, Sadiq. And now to Sean.
Chair, I think it's important to clear up. When I retweeted that, what I retweeted, Sadiq, and you're very well aware of this, was your failed bus contract. I wasn't a party to what other people wrote on it. It's about a failed contract that you had done to serve Londoners transport. But to move on to the question, of course, you adopt the Ihra definition. I embrace that wholeheartedly. And I've been outspoken in my support for raising awareness of some of the challenges that Jewish students face on campus. I remember I was contacted by 2 students who are here in London, who live in Hendon, who had written to me and said, Sean, are you aware these things come down and see us? We'd like to talk to you. And we had a very long conversation in which they were very, very descriptive, very eloquent in telling me what challenges they're facing and what support I could give them to help them overcome that. And of course, they weren't just focused on Yale University, they were focused on all universities as well. We went on to talk about Israel Apartheid Week and how abhorrent that is. And I absolutely stand up to that. And I've taken every opportunity I can to do that. But we need to go further. We need to take an action. It's easy to make noises. It's easy to oppose your own party when that person that you nominated is on the way out. What we need to do is take a stance and take action. So why don't we ban the Al-Quds March? It is a scheduled hate crime. I'd like to believe that everybody thinks that we shouldn't have hate crime in London, yet we have one that's scheduled every year, but nobody stepped up and banned that. And before somebody tells you they can't ban it, let's ask for that to be banned. Let's be taken to court. Let's have it out on this particular issue. Because I think the challenges that Jewish students are facing on campus across the country and in London, and the challenges that the Jewish community are facing in general would be very, very well represented in taking this case on. And I absolutely commit to do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. We are running out of time. So what I'm proposing we now do is to go to each candidate's closing speech. And just to remind everybody that we have 60 seconds per speech. So if we can start with Sadiq. Thank you.
Well, thank you. This has been a fantastic hustings. I've enjoyed it. I'll end by taking this opportunity to say how grateful I am to the Jewish community for the warmth and friendship you've shown me right from my first day as mayor. It means more than you know, and I think it sends a powerful message out to the world about our city. I'm proud of my achievements as mayor, but there's still so much more I want to do to make London a fairer, safer, greener, more equal city, particularly as we seek to recover from this pandemic. So I hope you'll continue to put your faith in me to stand up for the best interests of the Jewish community and the whole of our city with a brighter future for all of London's communities. Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you. And now if we could go to Sean. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been a really interesting debate, and I hope you've seen some examples of my values and the esteem that I have for London's Jewish community. This election really, really does matter. And it's not just the past 5 years that I've been in the Assembly, but there's been 21 years of Greens being elected there. And in that time, our ideas have been some of the most influential on successive mayors. And I think it's time for a Green mayor, because we don't only need a new start, but a new mission to build a city that's truly green and an example of true respect, togetherness and social justice too. We've had an incredible response to our policies so far from Londoners all across the city. Our Green Manifesto has got people thinking, and from now until the election, there's actually more to come too. Londoners are ready for big ideas. There are Green mayors all over Europe rolling up their sleeves, getting ready to transform their cities. So instead of electing someone who needs to be pushed to do the right thing again, please choose someone who has the right ideas from the start. Trust me, and see how London can transform in the next 3 years.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. And now to Sean.
Thank you. It's been great to be here tonight, but let's be realistic. The last 5 years in London has been characterised by a failure to deliver for Londoners. So I'll be giving London a fresh start and making sure we deliver. I'll be pledging to protect the Jewish community and the traditions of that community and all of our faith communities and people of non-faith as well across London. London is the greatest city in the world as long as we work at it. London is the greatest city in the world as long as we use City Hall to be a crossroads to bring everybody together to forge forward for the future. It's been great, my relationship with the Jewish community, and it's been a really good opportunity for me to learn the challenges and also the joys of being part of the Jewish community, which of course is a huge benefit to London in general. So on May the 6th, the choice needs to be made. Do we continue on this same path with rising crime, less opportunity, or do we get a fresh start for London?
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. And finally to Louisa.
Thank you. Our city is at a crucial moment where we either look forwards or try to go backwards to the way things were. My campaign and plan for London is all about embracing change. From Boris Johnson to the current Mayor of London, there are no concrete plans to adapt to changes like the shift to home working. We need big ideas and urgent action to address our challenges, from Brexit to climate change, to ensuring we have a fair recovery, and to ensure we don't miss out on the opportunities in front of us as our city changes. I would embrace change, making sure London has strong local businesses and decent jobs, that everyone has an affordable place to call home, that our air is clean to breathe, and that all of our communities are safe, secure, and celebrated. And key to making this happen is working together. We can draw on the Jewish ideal of tikkun olam to heal our society after the devastation of the last year. We've seen the amazing potential of our city when we work together, and that's the potential I'd harness as mayor. And I know the Jewish community has a big role to play in that. So if you agree with my plan, then let's take London forward together.
Thank you. Thank you, Louisa. Thank you, all candidates. It's been a very interesting, fascinating evening. And I'd now just like to hand over to Justin Cohen of Jewish News, who will give the vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Adrian. And thank you to our 4 candidates for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us tonight. To Sadiq Khan, Shaun Bailey, Luisa Porritt, and Shaun Bailey. Tonight showed once again that in addition to the specific issues of relevance to the Jewish community, the issues that perhaps gain the most headlines, Jewish Londoners, like all others, are also interested in issues like transport and housing. Jewish News is proud once again to be supporting these hustings in an election where opportunities for pressing the flesh and kissing babies have been more limited than usual. Such opportunities for direct engagement are more important than ever. For that, thank you to Daniel Koski and the London Jewish Forum for organising, and thanks also to partners, the Jewish Leadership Council and the Board of Deputies. As Adrian mentioned earlier, we have a series of hustings coming up in for the elections of the London Assembly starting tomorrow night with Ealing and Hillingdon, and also in forthcoming days for the Hertfordshire County Council elections. Until then, please check out our website later tonight. I hope that our new Political editor Lee Harpin will have his story up by then, and also this week's Jewish News for full coverage of tonight's event. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.